Hi, I'm Jed Kolko, an economist at the Public Policy Institute of California, and today we're talking about both the facts and the policies on housing in our state. In housing, California faces two problems. First, the foreclosure crisis, which is the result of rapidly falling housing prices during this crash, and at the same time, housing prices in California remain relatively high. Now this may seem strange. How is it that California could have both rapidly falling housing prices and housing prices that are still, by many measures, quite high? And how can California manage? Well, let's start first with the facts. In this recent crisis, starting in roughly early 2006, housing prices in California have fallen by almost half throughout the state, and in some parts of the state, like the central and northern San Joaquin Valley, by well over half. Foreclosures have taken off as prices have fallen, and not only have foreclosures risen, but construction, especially of single-family homes, has almost ground to a halt. As a result, in California, roughly 1/3 of borrowers are underwater, which means they owe more on their mortgage than their home is worth. And with unemployment stubbornly high in California and likely to be so for many years, defaults and foreclosures are likely to continue. Now, at the same time as this crisis of falling prices, high foreclosures, and low construction, prices in California nonetheless still remain high. When we look at the average home price in California today, it is still 80% higher than the average home price in the US. How can this be if prices have fallen? Well, during the boom of the housing bubble, the gap between housing prices in California and the US was even bigger. At that time, home prices were well over twice as high in California as the US. So in this crash, the gap has narrowed somewhat, but California is still very expensive relative to the rest of the US. And as another sign that the market is tight, vacancy rates in California are among the lowest of all the states. Vacancy rates are certainly higher now in California and everywhere else than they were during the housing boom, but comparing California to other states, vacancy rates are still relatively low. As a result of the continued high housing prices in California, housing still remains unaffordable for many lower-income households, and it's also a significant cost of doing business in California. Businesses, of course, pay for their own real estate, but high housing prices raise the cost of living for everybody, and businesses need to pay workers more here than elsewhere so workers can afford to live here. So what can California do? These two problems, the foreclosure crisis and high housing prices, have different policy solutions. First, on the foreclosure side. Much of what can be done about foreclosures happens at the federal level. The main players in housing finance and the mortgage market, including Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and many of the largest banks, are overseen or regulated by the federal government. What California, like other states, can do are two things. First, states control the legal process that determine who gets foreclosed on and when. Second, California has $2 billion available to distribute in the hardest hit fund that will help individual borrowers get mortgage modifications and other loan revisions. When it comes to high housing prices, California faces different policy challenges. One approach is to support the construction of affordable housing. Two of the tools that California has used in the past, funding this through general obligation bonds and using redevelopment funds, are both challenged by the budget crisis in California and will be for years to come. The other thing California could do would be to examine some of the land use regulations and permitting and other fees that make it more expensive to build housing in California than in most other places. With construction relatively low today, this may not seem like a pressing problem. But given the relatively tight housing market in California and the perennial high prices, this will become an issue again in the future. No one policy can solve both California's foreclosure crisis and the problem of high prices. Today, California's immediate concern is the foreclosure crisis. But affordability, high housing prices, and the cost of doing business in California will return to the forefront of housing policy in California. Thank you for listening.